is kind of my home where I'm stood now. This is the view out the windows where I guess I grew up. Sunny St Helens in north of England. And in contrast, I'm sure you've all seen this meme, you know, how it started, how it's going. This was the last client meeting I had. The last time I went into someone's house, it was Sean Parker's house, who is a billionaire venture capitalist and hacker. This is his house in Hollywood. So those statues that you just saw then were Ai Weiwei's Chinese zodiac, Chinese busts made of solid gold, and you know, basically priceless art. And I think it's got an interesting contrast. So, you know, I'll talk about like that experience that I had, because I think it's a funny one towards the end of the presentation. But really, I suppose today is like, how does this happen? How do you get from St Helens to the Hollywood Hills? And, you know, what were the kind of steps in between? Making your mark is the conference theme this year. I think I've spoken at the last 4 or 5 conferences, and, you know, each year I've kind of brought a different set of work and, you know, done more of a kind of like, this is what's happening in the world right now, and talks a lot about technology. This one is just going to be like, I think, more about like making the marks, because I don't think it's a singular thing. Building a career is lots of small steps, sometimes backwards, sometimes sideways, and hopefully some forwards. And so basically, I'm just going to break today up into 3 things: Mark 1, Mark 2, and Mark 3, if you like. So Mark 1 is really just about me building confidence and competency and actually learning how to be a designer, finding out what kind of designer I wanted to be. So that's probably like the first, including university, first 4 or 5 years out of university. Then building a career, so like really getting focused on, you know, building a kind of name for myself, and, you know, really a reputation for standing for a certain type of work, and also, you know, building kind of businesses. The final one though is building a company. So we just launched our own company yesterday, so I can talk to you about that just to finish. So like before I start, you know, get into that, I just want to kind of acknowledge the moment that we're in right now, which is pretty extraordinary. I'm sure, you know, a lot of students there, you know, probably all of you are a little worried, anxious, as we all are, about, you know, what's going on in the world. Multiple crises: environmental, cultural, social, political, of course, health. But just to reassure you somewhat, when I graduated back in 2002, there were multiple crises happening at the same time as well. So first of all, it was one of the worst economic recessions of all time. It was called the dot bomb. So this happened after a huge investment in the kind of enthusiasm for the internet. So a lot of companies were just given lots of capital, backed all the way, didn't have a viable business model, and it became this gigantic bubble which burst. And, you know, there was genuine panic on Wall Street and throughout the world, set off an economic crisis. So this is in 2002 when I was graduating. So it was quite a worrying time, because, you know, jobs were going, rising unemployment, and there were also other kind of crises that bookended this either way as well. So just 1 year before, of course, we had 9/11.
It's 8:52 here in New York. I'm Bryant Gumbel. We understand that there has been a plane crash on the southern tip of Manhattan. You're looking at the World Trade Center. We understand that a plane...
That's the first report of that. And then 1 year later, we all went to war with America to Iraq. So you know, you have these huge moments historically happening when we graduated. The president at the time was George Bush.
At this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger.
It's easy to forget, at the time we thought Bush was the devil incarnate. We just did not think that there could possibly be a worse president than George Bush. You know, Radiohead famously named one of their albums after him, Hail the Thief, because he was thought to have rigged and robbed the election. And I mean, Jesus, nothing compared to Trump. So there was this, you know, tremendous turmoil, I think, happening in the world. But I think one point that I want to make throughout this presentation is that from these crises, new things emerge all the time. And oftentimes our industry really does benefit from that in some way. So this is Friendster. So this was launched in 2002, at the same time I graduated. And it was one of the world's first social medias. This is Mark Zuckerberg on there with his profile. And you can see one of his 20 friends is, in fact, Mr. Sean Parker there, who, again, I'll talk about later. But I think there's something interesting that happens out of crises, almost new industries, new platforms, new media emerges from that. And just think about how much social media has changed lives for better or worse, and industries for better or worse since then. So, you know, that's the kind of point that I want to make throughout, really. From crises, new things emerge. So really this building a competency, building confidence was the first, I guess, mark one in my career. So I'm sure Andy showed you this. This is us. I'm right on the right there. All you can see is my nose, because it's a very big nose, and you can just about see it cropping into the picture there. And over here we have on the left JT and Robin, and they were industry students that come back from placement. I think we were first years, I can't remember. We might have been second years. Anyway, look, as Andy's illustrated here, we were all kind of laser focused on them, talking us through their portfolios basically, and total focus on what they were telling us. We were trying to absorb everything, every word, really, every piece of advice we could get. And I mean, obviously, social media, as I mentioned, has completely changed the world around us now. But at the time here, this was the most valuable thing to us because it was the only way we could really get any information. You know, there was no conference week. There was no networking, social media, or anything like that. So this was just gold to us. And we kind of like hung on there every word, just trying to get a sense of what it was like in the industry. You know, what did we need to do? What standard did we need to hit to be able to make it? You know, and so I think it's really interesting to look back. I can't believe how old this picture looks. So look, my first projects at university, this was the first idea I ever had for a poster for the Museum of Emotions. I think it was a DNA debrief, student brief, and, you know, really applying, you know, the teachings of Preston, you know, which is communication, not decoration, minimalism, the economy of the idea, what can you strip out and still, you know, communicate. You know, logo, you know, Art Lounge, this was an actual live brief for a community centre that was also an art gallery. So a very simple idea. And this was something that Andy sent me that I hadn't seen since I graduated, but I think it's probably the project that was most proud about, really, which was an interesting initiative, if you like. And these are very commonplace now, but at the time it was quite unique, which is rounding up spur change, the 99p rounded up to the pound, and the extra penny you know, goes to a charity. And, you know, on the right there, the back of the receipt, you can see that very simple emblem there, which is change world, change world, change world. And in really good writing, I think I was really interested in language and the power of the written word and the spoken word and how that connects an idea together. So that was probably the idea that I was most proud of. I think Ben Casey actually managed to get Co-op Bank to do this, I think. I can't remember. But anyway, it was a nice idea. Quite commonplace now, but at the time, it was quite a unique idea. So, you know, as I graduated, I was really still into this. I had a couple of things that was going on. One was just absolute minimalism. I think this is a good example of that. It's one of the first briefs that I did at the Chase. You know, obviously you all know the Chase, and we would do these self-initiated projects. This one was to send an Easter egg mailer out to a client. So my idea was to do a box that said egg on it and a card that said chicken on it, and then you would courier these two clients separately, so they would receive one or the other first, answering the age-old question of which came first, the chicken or the egg. So it's kind of like a very Preston idea. It's almost like a little art project. I think this was the first award I won, I can't remember, in the industry, so I was really kind of quite chuffed with that. This is another project that I was lucky to work on. In my early career, I was really working on some really great clients, lots of arts and culture clients, things like that. This was a book that we made for the National Portrait Gallery to celebrate gay icons. They produced this beautiful book, and they had 6 leading figures in British gay culture to write about their heroes that, you know, either helped them come out or just people they admired in culture. And so this was the idea, the bookbinder's ribbons, 6 contributors, 6 chapters, 6 colors of the rainbow flag, perfectly combine as a navigation to the book. And you can see, just to zoom in here, this was it. I didn't design any of the book. All I did was the cover and, you know, the whatever. So it's just like a nice idea, a nice Preston idea. I think very simple, very minimal. Yorkshire Water was a client that I worked on, I think, for the first 3 or 4 years of my career. And I actually really enjoyed this. It's not the sexiest client in the world, far from it. But I think what actually working on one client taught me was real appreciation of branding, in the sense that how do you create new things within an established system? So whilst still being on brand for Yorkshire Water, how can you push the edges of that brand identity to keep it interesting whilst still keeping it Yorkshire Water, if you know what I mean? And we would get like, there weren't big briefs, but we'd get like an example. How do we actually celebrate that Yorkshire's beaches have been awarded a gold standard? So they actually did a great job of cleaning up Yorkshire's seaside Yorkshire Water, and they wanted a campaign to celebrate this and to let their customers know that they'd done this deed. Well, the problem was they didn't have any money, so they didn't have, the budget was tiny. And so in the end, we came up with an idea about postcards and actually taking those kind of like seaside postcards and just cleaning them up. So this is, again, a very language-based idea. So you all know these kind of smutty seaside postcards that are kind of like carry-on camp innuendo. And so basically we cleaned them up. That was the idea they came up with. And so you can see that we set up the innuendo and then we just deadpan answer it. So the one on the left there, it's two fellas perving on a woman. They say, she's got a fine purr. And then he answers, yes, they'll protect her eyes from harmful UV rays. So it's almost like this deadpan answer. And then at the bottom it says, we've cleaned up Yorkshire's seaside. So really cheap. We just found an illustrator, wrote them ourselves, and then we produced these, you know, in a week, and it was so cost effective to execute. Here's another one, Steve Bland. So Steve Bland's a retoucher that we used to use at the Chase. So this guy was legendary because he was so quick and he was so cheap. And, you know, some of the things he could do in Photoshop was just magic. So we used to joke that he was like a Photoshop wizard. And, you know, when he asked us to do his identity, we did it for free. But that was the idea, basically. We rebranded him from Steve Bland. Get some background noise. If someone go on mute or something, it just sounds like someone's cleaning out a cupboard. Still there, but I'll carry on. All right, so Steve Bland became the Great Blandini. So really rebranding him as this Photoshop wizard. This was a trend at the time, so you know, people holding up posters to give it a sense of scale. So here we're just taking the piss basically out of that trend by levitating the poster as if by magic. But this is again a very verbal idea. Obviously it's pastiche. Gasp as the Blandini vanishes elements of your choice, astonishing adjustments. Approach and be amazed, mesmerizing, marvelous, magnificent. So worked with a guy called Mike Reed on this, who's a brilliant copywriter. And again, he did it for free. We did it for free just as a favor to Blandy because he'd done so many favors for us. And yeah, this went on to get in D&AD and stuff. These were his business cards. So it comes with a deck of cards. We wrote the retoucher's oath at the back there, which is obviously a pastiche of the magician's oath. Photoshop spelt with a double P. And each card comes with a trick. So the vanishing act, the rabbit from the hat, etc. You see the little bee. And this was the poster tube, because at the time, you know, this is back in the day, he was still doing a lot of retouching for print. So he needed to send out posters, basically, or prints, proofs. So the roll up, poster tube, became the magic wand, etc. We actually went on to make a little book for him. We called it The Little Book of Photoshop Trickery, as performed by the Blandini himself. And this was all hand-drawn from scratch. Every page in here was hand-drawn. We didn't use a computer at all with this typography. I worked with a brilliant designer, a young junior designer called Jefton Sunker. And yeah, we illustrated this whole thing. So the idea behind the book was, actually, let's give people genuine tips in Photoshop. And it's amazing when you look at Photoshop how magical it sounds. So we did 10 tricks. On 9 and 10, you can see on the right there. So this one is the glowing edge. And number 10 is the adjustment layer. They are genuine actual Photoshop techniques and tricks. And then we actually applied those. So we had Steve Bland actually create these retouches for us. So we did the sawing the lady in half and then the man transfixed into a lion on the right there. So we got a chance to show off his knowledge and his skills. So yeah, so at that time in my life, first 4 or 5 years out, I really can see a couple of themes there, can't you? One, minimalism. So just really stripping away, of course, the Chase philosophy, as you all know, is how much can you remove? And it was really about reduction and the economy of the idea. 2, a lot of pastiche. So pastiching, you know, of course, the Yorkshire seaside postcards, magicians, the language of that kind of that. And also, I think fun. I was just having a lot of fun with the work and a lot of writing as well. So a lot of the ideas were actually verbally based. So those things I definitely did keep with me throughout my career, but I did hit a bit of a personal crisis where I was just kind of lost. I felt I was a little bit lost. I was like, look, I'm not really getting what I need out of this. I'm looking for a bigger challenge. I really want to apply, I guess, whatever limited ability I have to bigger problems. And I just wanted to go and travel as well. I'd wanted to travel when graduating, but because of 9/11, travel was just like not happening. No one was going traveling. And it was just too dangerous. So I kind of put off traveling until this point. And I'm really glad that I did. Anyway, so this was 2008. And there was another crisis, not just my own personal crisis, but more crises were happening.
To take it out.
our nation continues on this course, the economic damage will be painful and lasting.
But this is no longer just a Wall Street crisis, this is an American crisis.
So this was Black Monday. So 2008, again, one of the world's worst financial crises in history. Actually, the record fall in daily drop for the stock market. I'm sure you all remember this. Of course, you've lived through it. But I think what was most terrifying about this one was that the financial institutions themselves were falling, which had never happened in history. So these institutions that we base culture, we base capitalism, were so corrupt that they were collapsing in front of our eyes, which was terrifying. It's amazing how close England itself was to going under. You remember, of course, the bailout for Royal Bank of Scotland, all the other ones there was still paying for that today. Of course, there was some hope. You heard him there at the end. So Bush was gone and Mr. Obama was coming in 2008. So he inherited that. And it just makes you think what an amazing job he did to turn around the economy and gift President Trump, one of the most great moments in American economic history, really. And of course, this little car company launched in 2008. This was the first time Tesla launched their first car. So again, with like huge crises, I think come new opportunities, new leadership. Tesla accelerating the electric economy, like social media had kind of accelerated the digital economy back in 2002 when I graduated. So it was an exciting time as well as a really stressful time. And I was like, fuck it, I'm going traveling. I've had enough. I've been working my ass off for so long. I was knackered, even though I was young, and I was kind of just looking for a new challenge. I just wanted to go and see some of the world, and hopefully then that would give me the confidence to then impact the world a little bit more. So I went traveling. I went and lived with some monks for a little while. That was brilliant. Lived with some villagers in Thailand, in North Thailand. Drove around the north of Vietnam on a motorbike, which was cool. And at this stage, I was just like looking for, like I say, to push myself. Quite literally, this is jumping off the world's second biggest bungee jump. I think this is like a metaphor for my mental state at this moment. It's just like I just want to test myself. I want to try new things, new experiences. It's quite scary because your ankles are tied together, so you can't walk.
So looking forward to taking it all in. Here we go, big fella.
Great song by 10cc. So anyway, so that was, again, just looking for a challenge, try new things, throw yourself off a 150-meter wire, and eventually landed in Sydney. Amazing place to live and work. Definitely inspired by Andy B's travels and tales of living and working in Sydney in Australia. Definitely would recommend it to anybody. It was definitely life-changing for me. And I guess Mark 2 of my career of making a mark, which was really starting to focus on how do I build a career that I want. Up until this point, I'd just been kind of not taking things too seriously, really. I've been working hard, but also not really focused on what kind of designer or career I wanted to have. It was at this point where I decided that I really wanted to get much closer to the business. So to not just work on the visual layer or the graphics, but actually think about the impact that you could make through your work. And that drew me to branding as an industry. I've talked about this a lot, so I won't kind of labor it. And if you haven't seen it, you can get more kind of detailed presentations if you have a look on YouTube or whatever. But this is, I think, truly the first time I felt like I'd made a mark in the world. I was Australia. This is the old brands, and I couldn't really not talk about this, seeing as it's about making a mark. So they asked us to rebrand them and give them a new logo. Of course, they need one. But it was much bigger, the impact. I think we recognized that at the time we were working with them, there was this, again, huge crisis happening in health with dementia, was on the rise. People don't know about it. It's uncurable. It affects people as young as 30 because of lifestyle changes, obesity, poor diet. It's actually becoming this invisible epidemic. There's a huge stigma surrounding it. Unlike cancer, where you're like, well, let's fight cancer. Everyone's almost afraid to talk about dementia. And, people that have dementia are almost hidden away from society. So lots of problems. And obviously this brand was not really in a state to be able to tackle it. And what we did was not just rebrand them, but we systematically redesigned the business for them. We moved them from a federated model to a centralized model. We gave them 3 things to stand for instead of 43. And we basically fixed the back end of the business, if you like, to use a technical term. so that they could then tackle this huge challenge. And then we created the brand. So it's a very verbal brand. You've seen a theme here, of course, language-based identities that are very flexible. So the idea is that Alzheimer's Australia remains fixed. And then because no one talks about this disease, we want to start the conversation and we want to build a conversation around the identity. So sometimes we're talking about helping people to understand Alzheimer's and educate Australia. Other times we want people to really fight Alzheimer's so that we can protect Australia. And ultimately, we all want to tackle Alzheimer's together for Australia. And so what this allowed us to do is to create a really flexible verbal system that can speak to different types of stakeholders. So for instance, if we're trying to educate or fight, or literally we're talking to the government, or we're asking people for funding, the brand can have a conversation that's appropriate. Like I say, I'm not going to go into too much detail here, but you can see the system, just 2 colors, oftentimes just 4 words. Typeface costs $30. It's really efficient as a system, very simple to execute, and yet really flexible. And most importantly, you can see down here these badges and the top left image there. It was designed really to be a grassroots social movement. So we designed this so that people could work with it and put their own message in there. And we actually launched the brand by hosting basically a protest rally. So we took 1,000 people down to Canberra and we marched on Government House. We had a plane fly over and we literally took this fight to the steps of government. And ultimately it was really successful because the government relented and essentially gave the charity $350 million in extra funding. And I think that's a great example, I think, of what branding can do. Not every branding project works out this way, that's for sure. But I think brand's superpower is just getting people aligned on the inside and marching in, literally in this case, marching in the same direction. And it became this movement, really, that's still going on today. This is just a lot of the stuff that we didn't have anything to do with here. People organizing rallies and fights and races and runs and all that kind of stuff. So a huge achievement, really. I think the first time that I felt I'd done something truly useful in my career. This is like 10 years into my career, so be patient. It wasn't all serious though. This was another fun one as well from Australia, which was a startup that's basically a pay TV service like cable TV for people that don't want to pay for cable TV. So it's a box. There's nothing interesting about the box, to be honest. But the service is really cheap, and it's kind of like Netflix before Netflix came along, but it's in a hardware box. And so our brief was, how do you make this interesting? How do you do budget, but not do it so that it feels cheap? So we renamed the brand, redesigned it. We called it Igloo. So the idea was that, like an igloo, it's warm inside. You can watch it with the family. And it's fun without being cheap. Igloo basically are these little creatures that love entertainment. So one of the problems with this business was they didn't have any money to show any of the content, so they couldn't license any of the content. So we're like, well, this is all about TV and content. How are we going to get that in without being able to license any of it? So we created these characters basically that dress up as the content. So here's a quick example. So that's Igloo. And Igloo speaks 2 languages, English and English. So this is English. So it's any word with a double O in it. So again, a theme here, right? Branded language. How do we think visually and verbally? And it had a real personality to it. I won't show you much of this, but here's the business cards. Everybody that joined the team, top left for Igloo, got their own little Igloo avatar created. And it's just really nice little ideas throughout the whole thing. Even the remote controller at the top right, this was like a generic product that you couldn't really change. The only thing we could change was a little kind of white text. So we changed the mute button to shh. And it's just those little tiny touches, I think, that's definitely Preston thinking. That just makes the whole thing, just brand system, just feel a bit more connected and memorable and special, So again, still having fun. I think this is a really Preston idea, as are all these ideas, to be honest. Just really simple ideas. Yeah, this was the first time Interbrand had ever won a Cannes Award in 40 years. So this was quite a big deal for Interbrand. And we did a whole body of work here. I'm sure if you wanted to look, you could find some more stuff. But I think this was enough to really make a mark. Together, the team of us there are about 50 of us all together from scratch to 50 people in 4 years. And, we all kind of went on to do really interesting things. Afterwards, I got recruited and I moved to New York after this. So I joined a company called RGA. And I was there for the last 6 years. Which brings us to Sean Parker. So I've talked a lot about RGA. I've done this talk for the last 5 years, and I don't kind of like to repeat myself. So I'm not really going to show much work. I'm just going to tell you the story of Sean Parker because it's quite funny, and I'll just give you a little taste or a little insight into what it's like to work with some of these kind of incredible tech entrepreneurs. So you probably don't know who Sean Parker is. So Sean Parker was the hacker inventor of Napster. Napster was launched in the 90s. It was basically Spotify 12 years before Spotify came along, except it was completely illegal and he was giving it away for free. So this guy had the idea for Spotify, basically. That's where it came from. And he got kind of sued and was almost made bankrupt. But he'd made his name in Silicon Valley and is genuinely a genius. And he became one of the first advisors to Facebook. So Facebook, the movie, is played by Justin Timberlake. If you haven't seen this film, check it out. It's really good. And so this is perhaps what he's most famous for in Facebook, the movie, this one scene.
Drop the just Facebook. It's clean.
Yeah, so that scene is him basically just giving loads of advice about what it's like to live in Silicon Valley and telling him to drop the from Facebook. So it became Facebook thanks to Sean Parker. He got married. This is his wedding. So he famously recreated Lord of the Rings for his wedding in a forest in California. And he got in a lot of trouble for this, actually, because they'd put up like a bridge and all kinds of things which caused damage to the forest. So he actually got fined and sued for this. And he actually ended up building an app for them to help forestry conservation. So anyway, he's a really interesting character. This is his house. It's next door to the Playboy mansion. And on the left there, you can see this is the back of his house. So we're just walking through his garden here. Over those are the palm trees there. That's the Playboy mansion. You can actually hear elephants because they have a zoo in there. Yeah, there's the Ai Weiwei art. Yeah, amazing. So anyway, so I walk into his house, and then the first thing I see is this on the left. And I'm like, fucking, is that a Picasso on the wall? He's like, yeah, it's a Picasso. And then he tells me that he's got all of his best art out because yesterday he had Obama and Elon Musk around for dinner. And on the right there, Anish Kapoor, you know, as you walk in, there's an Anthony Gormley statue. I mean, he's just got some of the world's best art surrounding him. This is just getting ready to present. And so we had this deck that I was going to present some brand work to him. And I was just about to present. And he's like, do you mind if I put some music on? And I said, no, of course not. Go for it. He's like, I made this playlist for Obama. I was like, oh, yeah. And he puts this music on so loud. I mean, so loud that he couldn't speak over it. And then he starts asking me questions about music. And he's going, who's this? And I was like, I told him who it was. And then he switches the song again and he goes, who's this? And it was a song that I knew as well. And he's like, yeah, but who wrote it originally? And I managed to know, by pure luck, I knew who that was as well. So he asked me 3 questions about music and I got all 3 right. And then he's like, okay, I like you. And then that was it then. We were like mates. He was making me cocktails. It was unbelievable. He made me like a house martini. Well, he didn't, but his butler did. But I couldn't present to him because he was just like so excited that he wanted to talk about the work. So I had this 200-page deck with like 3 design routes in it. He's like, nah, forget all about that. Let's just jam together. So we ended up designing the brand. This is I think that first shot was at 1 p.m. This was taken at 9 p.m. And then this was taken at 2 a.m. We just sat there with Sean Parker, hovering art director style. And we were basically designing this brand together. Look how stressed everybody is in the background. You can see like there are clients there, and all they care about is what does Sean think? What does Sean think? Because, you know, he's an interesting character. Anyway, so we ended up getting somewhere where he was happy, designing live, and then he made a sushi on the left here. This is from Nobu, which is one of the world's best sushi restaurants. He gets this sushi sent to us. It's all off-menu stuff, and he's like basically the biggest sushi geek. So he spent, I'm not joking, he spent 25 minutes talking about salmon. And We left, and as we left the building, on the right there, that's the Hollywood tour bus, and it was coming around, and it was like, you know, who's Sean Parker? You know, funny. Anyway, so what we were doing, I'll just show you this this project. It's definitely not the best project we ever did, but just so you know what we were working on, it's really rewarding. So, you know, Sean made his money out of technology, out of Facebook. He's been really critical of Facebook and social media in general ever since, to be fair to him. Very critical about what it's doing to society and to, God knows, our children's brains, all kinds of things. And he also had a friend, unfortunately, that died of cancer. And he decided to basically invest all of his money into cancer treatment. So he's built his own institute, and he's focused on a particular technology which is called cancer immunotherapy, which is showing real progress in the cures for cancer. In fact, according to Sean, when he was briefing me, he says that there are multiple cures for multiple different cancers already invented. The problem is they can't get into people's lives fast enough because of bureaucracy, because of silos, because of copyright and IP. People just aren't sharing learnings and can't get the treatments and testing set up fast enough to accelerate these treatments into life. So he built his own institute to do this. So he's basically trying to shorten the time it takes to get a cancer treatment into someone's life from 5 years down to a single year. And like I say, he's really putting his money where his mouth is. And he's taught himself. He really is a genuine expert on cancer immunotherapy now. And he's learned that himself. He really is kind of an incredible brain. This is the old brand. So you can see top left, the logo there, cancer. It's very generic. And they had this kind of hacking cancer together line, obviously taken from Sean's background. And you can see there's not really a lot to say about the brand. It's pretty generic. It certainly does not look like it's backed by one of the world's leading entrepreneurs and hackers, does it? And, you know, the identity system was very generic, a lot of stock shots and things. It's not really representative of who they were and kind of the ripples and the disruption in a good way that they're causing in the cancer space. And you'll see a lot of this. It was exactly the same with Alzheimer's, to be honest. Like a lot of charities actually visualize the problem of the charity. So if it's cancer, you show scary cells. If it's Alzheimer's, you show old people suffering or confused. I mean, look at that top right. It's like blind scientists machine gunning cancer cells. What's going on here? So anyway, so we didn't want to do any of that. We built this out of one of the world's first computer terminals. So we basically used this kind of like hacker, glitchy, pixelated 8-bit pixel aesthetic. And it's all about that acceleration that I talked about. So moving ideas from possibility to reality, from the bench to the bedside, and accelerating cancer research, moving faster to save more lives, essentially. So that was the system. It's very simple. And, you know, we take it through into print. This is a welcome kit for the member researcher. So really the client wasn't the public, it was the scientists, because they wanted people to join the Parker Institute. Business card, you see, very simple. So what we did was we actually photographed the scientists like they were heroes. This is something that Sean Parker said to us when we first met them. He said that these are really heroes, these people, you know, a lot of these very, very well thought of scientists, and we just shot them in a way so that they looked very heroic. That's how it looks on the website. Bookshelf, this is the interior stuff that carried through. We actually made a coffee table book for him as well. First piece of print I'd designed in years. And, you know, he definitely designed this with us, really. He gave us a lot of visual references and things. But that's the system. So yeah, I don't think I've ever talked about that project before, but I think it's kind of interesting. It's definitely not, I would say, our best piece of work, but just interesting, I think, to work with someone like Sean so closely. You know, basically co-design it with him live. It was like proper intense. But it was a great experience, and he really is doing a lot of good in the world. So, you know, I think he's redeemed himself. All right, so that brings us up to today. And today's crisis, I mean, you don't need a reminder of this because you're living through it, but I'll just show a news clip anyway.
Now to growing concerns about the deadly coronavirus officially hitting the U.S. Here's what we know. A Washington state resident fell ill after returning from Wuhan, China, where the outbreak began. Officials now say more than 400 people have been sickened and 9 people have died. The World Health Organization.
One of the first news reports on, well, literally patient zero in America. It's interesting, I think, just to look back at the first broadcast like that That 9/11 one was the first broadcast as well. Right, so this is it, Mark 3, the next stage of my career, I suppose, which is something that I haven't done before, which is truly building our own company. So we founded our own company, design and innovation company, and we launched yesterday. So I quit my job at RGA during one of the world's worst crises ever. So yeah, there's a running theme here. So we're called Proto. So this is the name. Proto means original first. So that's what Proto means. It generally comes before something that is, substantial. So, for instance, Iggy Pop is a proto-punk. It's also a prefix, which means it goes really well with every other word. So it's really brandable. You know what I mean? So like Proto-Brooklyn, Proto-Ventures, Proto-Innovation, etc. And as you've probably already noticed, because you're keen-eyed, you have these 3 circles in the logo, which are completely equidistant. And that never happens in graphics. If you have 3 shapes in a word, they are never equidistant. I didn't even cheat. It is a gift from the graphic gods. And so that became, of course, the system element that we build around. And so essentially what we do is you bring different disciplines together. So the Venn diagram became, basically a very simple way of getting that across. So this is a little hello animation. Yeah, so basically we're bringing together the things that I'm most interested in, which is brand, experience, and technology. And I think branding is really, really useful because brand really defines like why you exist as a company, what your purpose is, what your story is, why anyone should care. And it gives you a lens to make decisions around, okay, well, what types of products and experiences should we create then? And what technology do we need to actually deliver that and enhance that experience and hopefully add more value to the world? And so brand, experience, and technology is really the things we're bringing together with Proto. This is our purpose: advance people via the scale of meaningful companies. And so I think we really do want to focus on people, even though we work with some of the world's biggest clients, Nike and Google and etc. I think, we want to focus on the people inside the organization and the people that they serve. As I've said many times, the brands that kind of surround us every day, the biggest brands in the world, have an amazing kind of better or worse impact on our lives. It's kind of extraordinary. And so we want to make the kind of contributions they make as positive as possible and try and help companies not only innovate, but become better employers and better citizens of the world and better contributors to the environment, etc. So that's our purpose. And, as you probably guessed, considering I've kind of changed around quite a little bit as a designer, I really don't like being put in a box as a creative person. I don't like that. I really just want to learn as many different kind of ways of using design as a tool as possible. And so we're based around this idea of intersectional creativity, which means you need a diverse founding team. So this is our team. So we have Sunil, who's innovation, and Tran, who's our technology, Barry, growth, and design. We have Rachel, who's experience, Colby's operations, and Philip is strategy. And really, we're really good at what we do individually, but I think the magic is when we bring it together. And so we really do multiply what each other does. And so that's why it works this way. Yeah, so what's cool about working in this way is that it really does unlock different ways of thinking. And I would encourage any young designer, try and absorb as much as you can about experience and technology, because it will just make your work better, make your graphic design work better. Be interested in technology, be interested in experience design and where these things are going and design's impact on those things. It will honestly make you so much more employable. And I think, like I say, it's the best way of breaking new ground creatively, is to think about what new technologies we can use. I'll skip over this. Here's some of the things we make, custom tools. So this is the welcome card when you join Proto. We give you a free AirPod Pro box, and this is the little card that we designed. So it's to Alex, whatever. Here's the sneakers that you get, Proto ones. So we do custom sneakers every year. If we hit our number, so this is Proto number 1, and the cap. Yeah, there's the business card. So the business cards connect together. So, that shows the intersection again. And actually, really, when you put them together, we have an AR lens that triggers an animation. So you can see that here. The names burst off the card, again, just to show how we're integrated. Bauhaus, Medici, intersectional. And here's the interiors. All right, so you get the idea. So that's Proto. And most importantly, I think, is that we're actually heading towards B Corporation certification. If you don't know B Corps, it's my favorite idea of the last 2-3 years, an amazing initiative I'm sure you all know about it, but if you don't, check it out. So B Corporation takes 2 years to become certified. You have to essentially run your business in a very specific way, focusing on diversity, inclusion and equity, environmental contribution, charitable giving, basically building a company that's not just good for you, but good for everybody. And that's what B Corporation stands for. So Etsy, for instance, is a B Corp, and there's actually this really nice community around B Corp's businesses where they all stick together and they all look out for each other. Check it out. I wish I'd come up with this idea. It's brilliant. And it's only 2 years old and it's a real movement. Yeah, so congratulations to the people that invented that genius idea. So that's it. We launched yesterday. So as Andy said, if you were at the beginning of the call, so we had an article run in Forbes, which is massive for us. You know, Forbes is like one of the world's leading, of course, news institutions. And they gave us the best write-up. You know, the headline says it all really, but the write-up is so good. So we're off to a great start. Only launched yesterday. I was up till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. Had to launch our Instagram and stuff. It's been a bit of an intense 48 hours, which is why this presentation is so thrown together. But that's it. So final thoughts from me. Only have 3. And I think one of them is that I just want to make the point that, yes, today is stressful and kind of awful in many ways. But I hope that what I've showed you today shows you that good things can come from these crises. Our industry in particular always responds well. And I actually think right now, I don't think design has ever been needed more than it is today. I think that the creative and design industry tends to do very well off the back of crises because companies really need reinvention, and that's what design is for. That's what design is great for, making things better, improving things. If you think about the industry that I'm in right now, I just launched what we call an innovation company. And innovation as an industry came out of the 2008 crisis. It wasn't even an industry until then. So our industry changes constantly. And I think that good things come out of it. We've never seen this need for design since the Industrial Revolution, and there weren't any designers then. So I do think there is a huge need for us. And that means there's a huge need for you as well. You really are needed more than ever. I think my advice to you would be, you know, from this, just try and branch out, take that core understanding that you have from Preston around craft of the idea. You know, you're really good at thinking, really good. You know, you've had such a great head start by going to Preston, by learning from people like Andy and John. I mean, Preston changed my life. It changed my life. Meeting Andy changed my life. You know, it set me on a completely different trajectory. You have that platform to build on from Preston, and I think you are really needed more than ever. So that's it. You can follow me. Please follow us at We Are Proto. We need some followers. I only launched yesterday, so don't know how many followers we've got. It's probably about 900, which isn't bad. But yeah, and follow me at Mike Rigby if you like. And I think that's it from me. Yeah, thanks guys. I'm going to stop sharing so I can actually see people. Stop presenting. Ah, there we go. Well, thanks very much.
I can tell you're tired, Mike.
I'm knackered. Yeah, really knackered.
Yeah,
sorry, I was a little bit thrown together that presentation. Like I say, I only started writing it at about 6:30 this morning. I was like, a bit behind, but I think hopefully something useful in there that you can learn from. And I'm happy to answer any questions as well if you have any.
I got a couple early on actually from one of the final year students. He said, "Where do you see design advancing over the next decade? And is it AI technology going to change the way designers do things over the next decade?" Oh, somebody didn't hear me. Sorry, Mike. You right there? Can you hear me? Yeah.
Sorry, mate. I lost your sound then for a second.
No, these are a couple of questions from Mike in the final year graphics. Where do you see design advancing over the next decade? And is AI technology going to change the way designers do things over the next decade? So,
yeah, good question. I'll tackle that one last. I mean, if you want to know more about that, check out last year's talks. I talked about AI a lot and showed you some of the work that we're doing in that space. So yeah, I mean, AI will change design. AI will change everything that we do. And like any technology, there will be good and bad. I don't think like technology is inherently good or bad, but design makes it either or.
And so I think that's another reason why design's role has never been more important, is because we get to actually define and shape what we do with these new technologies. We know what the new technologies are. They're blockchain, AI, AR, VR, or spatial design. And 5G is the enabler. And they're the big technological shifts that are happening. AI is a tool. I mean, it's like electricity is a tool. And so if we think about applying AI as a tool, some obvious ways: optimization, so actually being able to optimize the design; automation, being able to take some of the headache out of creating assets, things like that. But there are all kinds of other uses as well that we just don't know yet. It's like day one of AI, isn't it? And so I think I'm an AI optimist. I think obviously there's a dystopian view of it as well. But I think we've used it in really interesting ways. I told you about last year. I showed you the Twitter bot that we'd created, which was there to promote diverse journalism and burst the kind of bubble that media exists in today. We use deep fakes for, David Beckham to promote malaria conservation and protection and things like that. So we've used AI quite a bit in our work for good, So I think that there's lots, like I say, who knows what we'll do with AI, but I think there are immediate uses. You can use it immediately. It's there. It's ready as a service. You can use Watson. You can use, there's Google's DeepMind, all that kind of stuff. Is interesting. What was the first question again?
Where do you see it going in the next decade? It might be, where do you see design advancing?
Yeah, I mean, it's related to that one, isn't it? I think to me, design really does, like I say, it should be the human influence on technology. Nothing stops technology. It never stops. And so we should embrace technology, and I think find the most positive use of it to help, make life more connected, interesting, more valuable, more efficient. And I do think that is another good use of AI, is actually the efficiency of the design process. I think last year, if anyone showed you a piece of machinery that an AI had made that could hold 3 times the weight of a man-made one, that used 40 or 50% less material, and it looked like this kind of like alien object. I mean, that's a great example of AI design, basically doing more with less. But yeah, I think, what's going to happen after the pandemic? We don't know, do we? I mean, the world's changing. I don't think we'll ever fully go back to the way it was before. So design has a role there. It's accelerated the digital economy, hasn't it? COVID. So, you only need to look at how much Amazon made. 1 in every £3 spent in England went to Amazon during the pandemic, which is insane when you think about it. There's like a cardboard shortage in the world, isn't there? Because the amount of kind of postage that's happening. And, what's going to happen? I mean, we're going to see a lot more of these traditional retailers disappear. Of course, Top Man went, didn't it? Yesterday, bought by Boohoo, a modern e-commerce giant. And they'll go because they didn't innovate. You know what I mean? Coming out of the 2008 financial crisis, they didn't change. Those businesses didn't change. They stayed to the business model. If you want to know more about that, by the way, there's an amazing book written by Clayton Christensen called The Innovator's Dilemma. And it's probably the most relevant still business book out there. It was written in the 90s and it's remarkably prescient. And he presents a problem which he calls the Innovator's Dilemma, which is essentially, if you see a big retailer like Debenhams, then when they go and say, well, what do we spend our next dollar on? It's much easier to say, let's double down on what we've got already. Let's actually put more into the retail space, put some sales on, let's get more customers through the door, instead of spending that dollar on your future, which might not be immediately profitable. And this is the innovator's dilemma. And this is what drowned some of the world's biggest companies, from Kodak, a million others that are going to disappear. It's the innovator's dilemma. And so that's where the innovation industry is.
Did you say the book was called The Innovator's Dilemma then?
Mm-hmm.
Right,
yeah.
So that's the name of the book. Right, okay, right, thank you.
That's the name of the book. It's written by Clayton Christensen, which is one of the world's leading thinkers in design, in innovation. He coined the term disruptive innovation, and he has his own definition of it, which is very specific. And unfortunately, he passed away last year, but he is a brilliant mind and a brilliant man. He wrote a second book, which is called The Innovator's Solution, which you can read as well. But really, The Innovator's Dilemma is the modern Bible of innovation work. And essentially what we're doing today is working with business models, not just brands. So really helping clients understand what is the next kind of best customer that you can find that will bankroll your future, and what are the services do we need to create around that customer.
Okay.
No worries. Do you have any more questions?
There's a couple. There's a couple in the just in the chat, just asking about creating portfolios and advice for creating portfolios in current climate.
Yeah, Well, I mean, I think well, I think, like I said, I think when you look at someone's career, it can almost just look, well, that just seems so far away. Where I think it is just, like I said, a million tiny steps. And I think, the first mark that I made was at university. And I think it left a mark on me. Like that mark that Preston left on me was indelible. And it was through meeting people like Andy and John and the like and Tommy, who taught me about design, really. And I only had like 3 or 4 projects when I left university that were any good. I showed you them. There was not. I didn't have anything else for that. Like the rest of them were rubbish. They were so bad. I mean, embarrassingly so. Like I cringe now. It was kind of like maybe a small kernel of an idea in there, but it was so badly crafted. It looked awful. And that's only natural, isn't it, to look back and think, well, I could have done that better and differently. But I didn't have many good pieces of work. What I did have, though, is the backing of Andy and the support of the people that have met on my placement. And I think that's a really important point is, your network is really important. Being part of Preston actually gifts you a network. You're part of you're part of the alumni of Preston, which is huge. And so that's a resource for you. But I think, to answer your question, really long-winded, I think you only need 5 projects that are good. I think those projects should say something about you as a designer. So you put your interests in there. Mine were all about the environment and, like that significant change was a business model idea. So I'm still trying to do the same thing now. I'm still focused on the environment. I'm still trying to think of new business models. And, that started at university. But I think my project said something about me. And I don't think you need 3 to 5 really good ideas, and that should be enough. And as well as the best attitude ever, isn't it? I mean, it's a cliche because it's true. Everyone says the same thing. But when you're a junior, it's just all about.
We've gone. He's gone. We've lost him.
I'm here.
I'm here.
When you're a junior, what?
When I was a junior, I think it was just all about the attitude. I would just try and be as helpful as possible. I would do anything to help, chip in any way I could. And I think, having the right attitude, building your network, and of course, the hard part, focusing on doing good work. But I only think you need 3 to 5 projects. I think distributing them and getting them out in the pandemic hasn't really changed, to be honest, because, I mean, it's all digital anyway. I mean, I can't remember ever looking through a physical portfolio in 15 years. So I'm always going to go to someone's website or get a PDF or something. And then, I'm recruiting, of course, for Proto right now. All the interviewing has been happening via Zoom, not Teams, via Zoom. And it's totally fine. I think that expectations have just shifted completely online. So it shouldn't stop you from getting your work out there. The hard part is doing the work and getting the work up to the right standard. And also, just like I say, so it said something about you, what you're about as a designer. And I'm not saying you design for yourself, never. You always design for the end user. But I think just being able to put some of yourself and your own interests and hobbies into your work is a great gift of design. And, if you look at my career, that's all I've been trying to do. How do I maximize my own impact on the world through design? But also, how do I fold in my own interest in business and technology and experience? And, I started at a boutique company, and then I went to branding, then I went to a technology company. Very deliberate choices to try and learn and make my job interesting. I mean, you spend so much time working, so much time. You better find something interesting about it, And so, I think that's why I was trying to look for a company and a culture where I could grow and I could learn off of people and, try as many different things as possible.
When do you hope to be back in the studio? I believe that, or back in America?
Yeah, back in America. Good question, mate. I don't know. I'm waiting on a visa. So I think probably about, let's say, 2 months away. And then we have an office. So we've got a new office, which is in Manhattan, World Trade Center 3. It's not a very nice looking building, but so we move in May. So we have the office from May. And actually, outside of our window is the memorial, is where 9/11 was. So the footprint with the fountain is directly out. So we're looking at that all day. It's going to be a bit depressing, but yeah. So we should be back in about May.
Good.
A couple more questions from the floor, Jonathan.
Yeah, Mike. That was absolutely fantastic. I've got a few GCSE and A-level students in the chat, and they're actually blown away by what you've been saying. So thank you very much. What kind of advice could you actually give to students that young who are just kind of at the start of their craft?
Yeah. Well, I think at this stage, well, compare it to me. So when I was at school, I did not go to a particularly good school, and I didn't really understand what design was until I got to university. I went to college, and at that point, design for me was very academic. It was very academic and very craft orientated. So I thought design was just really arranging images and colors, because that's all I was taught. You know, I was taught to paint, I was taught to set typography and to use Mac software, but no one told me that design was a tool to help move culture and people forward. I had no idea. I didn't even know there were ideas in design. What do you mean an idea? When I got to Preston and I was interviewed, my portfolio was trash. It was so bad. I don't know how I got into Preston, honestly. I have no idea. I think I must have just been enthusiastic or something. And we're like, well, this guy's a joker, but we'll give him a chance. And, you know, I had no clue what design was. So even just by being part of this conference week and listening to some great people from Preston, you're already ahead of where I was. Yeah, so I think design became interesting for me when I got to Preston. And I was old as well. I worked. I didn't go straight to college. I had to work. So I worked for 2-3 years. So I only graduated when I was 25. So like I went really late. So again, you're 3 years ahead of me, even if you know what I'm saying. So like basically, I'm enthusiastic about what you can do. I think find an industry or find a career that's interesting to you. To me, design's been brilliant for me. I've traveled around the world. You know, I live and work in New York. I love working there. That was design that did that. You know, design helped me to travel around the world and do good things. So I love it as an industry.
A passion's a word I think is coming through here, and a passion.
Very passionate,
Yeah.
very enthusiastic.
Yeah.
That's important.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and actually, I'm really quite an introverted person as well, which was tough for me. Like as a young person, particularly. I mean, I'm you know, you listen to this talk, and I'm talking for 50 minutes straight. Like after this, I might not talk for another 24 hours. Like I don't say anything. I'm like a massive introvert. Like I'll just say as little as possible. Andy can testify to that when he's having awkward conversations with me on Teams. It's like I just don't say shit. And you know, like that was really hard for me as a junior person trying to find my way in the industry, because the world's built for loud people, isn't it? The world is, you know, the world can't stop talking. And so like, how does an introvert fit into that world? And so like, I mean, maybe that's a bit of advice, because, you know, it's estimated that at least half the world's population is introverted. And so I used to design my own techniques. And so one of them was the meeting before the meeting and the meeting after the meeting. And so as a young person, when I was at the Chase, I was kind of used to kick myself all the time, because we'd be in group crits and we'd all be sat around talking about the problem, 2 creative directors and 3 designers and myself. And I would have ideas and I wouldn't say it because I wasn't sure if it was good enough. And then 30 minutes into the meeting, someone else would say the same idea and everyone would be like, genius. And I was like, fuck. And it's too late. You can't say it then. You can't say, I had that idea as well, because you just like an idiot. That kept happening to me. So like, I was like, oh, this is stupid. So basically what I started to do was the meeting before the meeting. So I'd write an email, because I was good at writing. And so I'd write an email to my creative director and say, hey, I had these loose ideas I was thinking about. And so like, and they would then say, oh, Mike, you emailed me that idea. Do you want to talk about that? So they'd almost picked from my ideas what was good before the meeting. And then I didn't have to say anything. Then they would say, hey, that's worth talking about. And then the meeting after the meeting, which is if you found that you didn't say something, I would just send a follow-up note. And I would say to my creative director or whatever, hey, just to build on that idea, here's a thought I had, but you know, and so I'd communicate in writing. That got me through the first 3 years of my career until I had some confidence in my own decision making. You know, I would write everything, never say shit. Yeah. And I actually think introversion has become like a massive advantage. And it's like now, because I just listen so much more, you know, than talk. And so I think designers are really good listeners. You know, you listen, you synthesize, you learn, and then you respond. That's the designer's brain. And, you know, I think most designers I've met are actually introverted, and that's a good thing for the job. So if you are shy and you struggle to articulate your thinking, try writing it. Try those techniques. That got me through the first couple of years, and I was able to build a career from there. And one final point in introversion is that it is not actually a lack of confidence. It's just how actually people respond neurologically. So the difference between extroversion and introversion is extroverts actually get energy from social stimulation. So if they're out at a party, they will actually get more energetic the more they speak to people. Whereas introverts, it actually drains. You get your energy from being alone, from being solitude. That's how you think, you know, that's how you actually get energy. and get stimulated is through solitude. Obama is a famous introvert. So Obama used to build 4 hours into his day for alone time. 4 hours between 8, until the rest of the night. He would actually work in solitude for 4 hours. That's the world's busiest man, and he made 4 hours for alone time every day. That was his technique as an introvert. Anyway, sidetrack.
Fascinating.
Good answer.
You read. I take it you read a lot as well, don't you? Like, I'm quite reading important as well. I think books.
Yeah, I think reading and watching. Because I do have a very visual brain, like I'm sure like a lot of you do. So I do watch a lot of talks and stuff. It's like not just about design either, about technology or whatever I'm interested in. I think watching TED Talks. There's so many great resources that you can learn from. But yeah, reading for sure.
A couple more questions, Ryan.
Hi, Mike.
Hi, mate.
Thank you. It was very interesting. I was just wondering, you spoke a bit about you've got this like mantra that you've carried from university of communication and not decoration, keeping things really simple. Do you ever find yourself slipping out of that sort of way of thinking? And if you do you have like a daily like a ritual of sorts to keep yourself in that way of looking at things from maybe a different angle?
Good question. Yeah, I think two answers. One of them is that it's a process. So the process is simplification. I think no idea just comes out totally simple. I think it's almost like, all right, so here's a rough idea. Now, how much can we remove from that idea to actually make it communicate better? And I think so it's a process. And that was drummed into me from the Chase and Preston. So I had 6 years of that. 3 at uni and 3 at the Chase, where it's like, remove, and it's a really good practice. But it's a practice. It's not like you don't necessarily always think simple. It's all about a process of removal, the economy of the idea. But what I would say that has changed is, whereas I think the first 4 or 5 years of my design practice were about reduction, the world changed. So like if you're actually designing brands, it's actually not about reduction anymore. It's about cohesion. It's actually about how do you connect so many different types of media together. So the idea of reducing a brand, for instance, down to that singular mark, like we used to in corporate identity, the badge basically that you would then just brand across different touch points, it's irrelevant now. So you have to create systems like Alzheimer's. So I had to almost retrain myself a little bit to still keep that philosophy of communication, not decoration, but how we communicate has changed. So that the communication matrix is so much more complicated now that the systems we design have to be more expansive than reductive. So I almost had to retrain myself a little bit to think communication, not decoration today means something different than it did when I was at university. And you can still keep it simple, but it has to be so much more extensible than ever before, just because of the explosion in modern media. So that's a bit of a complicated answer, but it's a process and it's changed.
Thank you for that.
I know you're knackered, Mike, but there's one more question. Nick.
Hello. Yeah, thanks for standing in front of a broken window for us. It's really motivating. Yeah, this is a bit of a two-part question, really. So first question is, obviously you've like been all over the world and been at some massive studios, and now obviously you're starting your own. So I just wanted to understand your sort of thinking behind making that jump into your own studio, and how do you sort of balance still being a creative and the sort of business aspect that comes with it? And then the second question was just, do you watch podcasts? And if you do you have any that you can recommend?
A16Z. A16Z is the best podcast I listen to.
Okay.
That's the Andreessen Horowitz technology podcast. A16Z. Write it down. It's a stupid name. Well, that's brilliant. I listen to that religiously. So good. The rest of them you'll know. It's all the classics. Yeah, but that one you probably don't know. And I think I always tell people to listen to that one. A16Z. So why start our own company? Well, I think it's the one thing that I haven't done. I've done the boutique, I've done branding, I've done a big technology company, and I've never really been a founder, never launched my own company. I think so. That's one thing. I think I've been at RJ for 6 years, which is the longest I've ever been a job. Usually I live my career and every 4 years I change, and reinvent, I suppose. But I think I'd stayed at RGA for 6 years because it was such a fascinating company to work at. It was brilliant. But it got to the point where, we built the company within RGA from 0 to 120 people, and it was a real success story by every metric. The work was good, the people were great, really lovely people, and the work, the culture was fantastic. But what next? What are you going to do next? So that was it, really. And I think we see an opportunity, honestly, coming out of this crisis for a new kind of company that isn't massive, that's small, that can do really interesting integrated work, inspired by the Bauhaus, that brings together brand, technology, and experience to help companies basically come out of this crisis and be better. So I think we see an opportunity. There's a restlessness there. We want to reinvent. And I think just the challenge of doing it properly for ourselves, and build a company we want to build. A massive motivator for me, to be honest, was the B Corps thing. I want to build a company that's B Corps. That's just not possible at RGA. The other thing that I wanted to do was work with more smaller companies, so work with startups and take equity. So have more of a ventures practice. It wasn't possible at RGA just because of the structure. So we've got more flexibility in our model. We can work with companies of different sizes, and it's just the next challenge. Let's see if we can do it for ourselves, and hopefully help. If we can.
I think we'll have to bring it to an end before.
Yeah.
Collapse.
Great.
Yeah. One more round of applause, do you think, everybody? Yeah.
Definitely.
Thanks for listening, and thanks to Preston. Honestly, changed my life. So I hope it does the same for you guys. And yeah, good luck. You'll be fine. Good luck.
We've got another talk at 3, haven't we? Which is interesting. Yeah, the graphics and the illustration peer-to-peer collaboration talk at 3.
3 o'clock should be good.
Yeah.
All right. See you later.
Brilliant.
Cheers, Mike. Take care. Sleep. Have a sleep.
Thank you.
He's gone.
Jim, you all right, Jim?
Yeah, sorry guys. I wanted to listen to this. I just couldn't get out of a meeting, so apologies for that. But I did make it in the end. I caught the last 5 minutes.
How are you, Jim? Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm fine, thanks, John. Yeah, all good. Excellent. Yeah, looking forward to me bit on Thursday.
Yeah.
You all right, Rupert?
I'm good, thanks, Andy. Sorry, I was the same. I was in a meeting, on a phone call, and then time ran away with me. So I managed to catch the last 20 minutes or so, 30 minutes. You all right?
Yeah, we're fine. We'll have a recording of that, anyways. We'll be able to.
Oh, that'd be good. Yeah.
To send it eventually once things calm down.
Yeah,
I think we can stop recording, can't we?
Stop it. Do you want me to stop it?
Yeah.